it from there. So I see Tara is joining us.
Hello.
Morning, Tara. How are you?
Good morning.
Good to see you. It's been a long time. So.
I know it's been a long time. Great to see you as well. Excuse my tardiness. I was actually heating up my coffee.
Okay. Well, I'm kind of doing the same thing. So yeah, we're all having Zoom meetings, Zoom classes. Again, thanks for joining us. As I've been telling all the guest speakers, be great to have that you under any circumstances, but it's especially helpful now because, it's a challenge, even though we have online classes, I've taught online, to just switch everything so quickly. It's been a challenge. And pretty much all the speakers I had lined up stayed on schedule, maybe in part because everything else is closed or canceled. Yeah.
You had a captive audience, Professor.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So Tara, I'm going to go through, I'll just kind of call on the students and I try to put their questions in some sense of order, but I went through what they asked because they got their questions to me last night. A lot of questions, career advice. They want to know, how you accomplish what you've done professionally. Of course, some political ones, a couple about how the coronavirus has affected your work. I want to ask in particular, what do you think is going to be the impact on the presidential election, long-term, short-term? But do you want to say a few words before we go into the Q&A?
Sure. Well, everyone's read my bio, so I probably don't need to go into any biographical information. I can offer a bit more detail about my business because I am an entrepreneur. I'm a small business owner, so certainly one of the populations that's at risk in this economy in the wake of COVID-19 and its impact on all of our lives. So I run a small business. There are 6 of us on my team, and we have an office in Jersey City, New Jersey, right outside. It's commonly referred to as the 6th borough. So we're right outside of New York City. And my business is we're a socially conscious PR and marketing agency. So all of our clients are either government, they're nonprofit, they're foundations. We do a lot of work in healthcare. And a lot of our political work these days is more around issue advocacy work, where we have clients who are fighting for specific issues, and we support the communication strategy to advance those issues and to advance their goals in terms of raising awareness in the public and generating some sort of action around those issues. So not the most lucrative business model in the world, but I sleep like a baby at night. So that's a great thing. And I've been able to make it work. I've been able to make it work for a long time. And I'm really proud of that. And I'm very proud of the fact that in this economy, with everything that's going on, that I am meeting my payroll every 2 weeks as an entrepreneur, and that I am not letting any staff go. No one has received a pay cut, and all of my vendors, including my rent, has been paid. So in this economy, when you have major corporations laying off thousands of people who have far more resources than I do, that's something I'm very proud
of. Well, that's good to hear on a number of levels, because I was going to ask, how you're doing, how your business is doing. So it's good to hear. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Don't get me wrong. We've taken some hits.
Yeah.
I want to be clear. It's not been easy.
Right.
But I've worked really hard to be able to have keep the business running during a rainy day, and we certainly have multiple rainy days right now going on. And my team is working hard, and we're adapting.
Great. Yeah. Well, you hit on the socially conscious part of your business, and Julia, that was something you were going to ask about. So maybe I'm going to have Julia start off with the questioning.
Yeah.
And then students, just introduce yourself first. Just say who you are, what you're studying, where you're from. Might just be helpful for Tara to know just a little bit about you.
Hi, I'm Julia Schneider. I'm a political science and journalism major, and I'm from Long Island. How do you market socially conscious organizations to make them stand apart from other organizations?
That's an excellent question. It is a challenge to market socially conscious organizations because typically they don't have the same size budget as a fracking company, right? Or the oil and gas industry. So what we do is first we take the narrative. So we take what they're doing, the work that we're doing, and we create a narrative around that work, an accurate narrative, a factual narrative, but we create a story around the work that they're doing. We try to find the most compelling and inspirational elements of the work that they're doing and tell that story. So I guess we have a lot of good examples, but one really great example would be, we have a client, she is a former refugee, and she immigrated to the United States after her country went through a civil war, a brutal civil war. She ended up in a refugee camp in Sierra Leone, and she's from Liberia, I should add that. And she immigrated to the US. She lived in public housing in Newark, and she wasn't telling any of this in her story as she was pursuing her endeavors. And she's for-profit. She owns 7 restaurants, soon to be 9. And she's also a real estate developer, but her projects are all mixed income, affordable housing, but high quality affordable housing, I would add. So she had all these inspirational elements of her background, and she was talking about ROI, right? Like she was talking about the ROI she generates. And I said, the media is not going to be as interested in that, but what they will be interested in is the fact that you are someone who came to this country with nothing. You lived in public housing, which is a testament to our public housing system, right? You went to public school, and now you are, she's the second largest employer in one of the communities where she operates businesses. So we told that story. We talked about her business as well, but we led with this story because that was what was really special and what set her apart. So we find those things that set our clients apart, and we tell those stories, and we kind of cut through a lot of the, I don't want to say noise, but we understand how the media works. And we make sure that the narrative speaks to those, the needs of the media, shall we say. And so since we've been marketing her in the way that we have, we've grown. I would say we had a hand in her growing to the point where she is right now. And she would say we had a hand in her growing. And so what makes her special is now, which I'm really proud of, is that even though she's a restaurant owner, she has guaranteed the salaries of all of her staff for the next few weeks, regardless of whether they're working. She also has told the staff who has needs, childcare needs, that they can go to the general managers of each of the restaurants and arrange their schedule based on how they can work, given that they have the childcare needs. So that's the type of client that we look for, even if it's a for-profit endeavor. And so and then we find those ways to tell those stories. And again, we told the story about her guaranteeing paychecks for folks. And the other thing she's doing is, in addition to that, she's providing free takeout breakfast and lunch for children until they return to school. So any family can come in and get free takeout breakfast and free takeout lunch. And so we told that story as well too, because there was a thirst in the media to hear about what people are doing, how people are responding to this crisis. And so we saw that as an opportunity to tell our clients' stories, how they're dealing with this crisis.
Tara, do you find that your clients, or maybe the public at large, doesn't understand how the media works and what the media needs? And is it difficult sometimes to convince somebody who maybe wants to tell a story that's real important to them, that a story that may not be that important, or a story they don't want to share, is the one that's going to get them the attention?
So yes, so it is a challenge sometimes, because some of our clients have endured. So some of our clients have some really powerful stories, and they've endured a lot of trauma. And so a lot of times they don't want to tell that story because they don't want to relive the trauma. Every time the media asks them about, because we have a lot of clients who are immigrants, and so they, went through things before they got here, right? Things to me that make their story much more interesting, and that also help to kind of dismantle stereotypes about immigrants, right? But sometimes they don't want to lead with that, or don't want to mention it at all. And that's perfectly fair. Which I work to explain to them, and my team works to explain to them that not only are you going to create media opportunities for yourself, but more importantly, you can help to redefine some of the negative narratives and stereotypes that exist. Right. But at the end of the day, if they're not looking to tell that story, then we respect that, certainly. But that's usually the challenge with a lot of clients. Ultimately, when we explain what we try to do is to educate our clients first and foremost about how communications work, about how PR works. And one of the main things that PR is very context driven. So because the media is context driven. So because COVID is what we're dealing with right now, most of the media coverage is around COVID. So we look for ways to tell our clients' story in the context of COVID, or tell their story about how they're adapting, or what operational changes, or what inspirational things they're doing in the wake of COVID, or what challenges they're facing in the wake of COVID. So the biggest thing we try to impress upon our clients is that the media is context driven. And so that our stories have to be a part of the context. Otherwise, the media is not going to care.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. 'Cause, yeah, I think I always found that, having worked in the media, having worked like in the communication sides of government agencies, it's something that a lot of people don't understand the dynamics of.
Right.
So,
especially government.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to switch to Ethan, who, we get a lot of really good questions, and Ethan kind of, went through your Twitter feed and has some questions for you. Well, it's after. Well, I got a kick out of it after I saw his question. I said, let me see what Tara's been tweeting about, and I was amused by how you shared your Netflix password with your parents, and it's really screwed up your
my dad, my algorithm is so messed up right now. And I gave him, he has his own profile, but he keeps clicking on my profile, and so it's all military and Narcos recommendations.
Oh, okay.
Like all the various Narcos shows that have been made, Narcos Mexico, Narcos, and then anything military.
We're on our daughter's account, but we're good about logging into our own IDs, so that doesn't get mixed up. Ethan, as I said, I really enjoyed your question. I thought it was a good one. So if you can just pose it to Tara, and again, just tell her a thing or two about you before you start.
Yeah. So good morning. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ethan Pryor. I'm a junior journalism major from Binghamton, New York. As Professor Lee said, I went through your Twitter, and I thought it was pretty funny. But one thing that I noticed is that you tended to be really outspoken on the topics you're passionate about, anywhere from Americans being unhappy and mean-spirited in certain events, and you went to even complimenting Governor Cuomo, even who you admit is not somebody that you normally agree with, but you were kind of complimenting on him on his leadership during this crisis time. And so something that, especially for my parents, I've always been told is to be careful about what I post, as I never really know who might be looking through my profile, especially in regards to me like going into the job world and applying for jobs. And so have you ever lost opportunities or gotten in trouble for being so outspoken on social medias like that? And if so, how do you deal with that and that balance?
That's an excellent question. So I am extremely outspoken on Twitter. The types of folks that would utilize my business, with some exceptions, we do get calls every now and then, ironically, from people who I blasted on Twitter. And that's because I think they're looking to get credibility by saying, oh, well, we have this liberal doing work for us, right? Or that's their goal, because we haven't taken them on as clients. But ironically, I do get calls from people from industries that I've been very critical of. But I would say, to answer your question directly about you, so because I do political commentary on television, my context is different, right? So people expect me to be, they expect my Twitter to be reflective of that, right? So I think it's viewed a bit differently than the normal communications or PR professional, because I have this additional context, and because when I first started the business, we were in fact a political consulting PR firm. So most of our clients in the initial days were candidates. So certainly I had the ability to be outspoken, because you're speaking on behalf of a political candidate. So they're outspoken, they're attacking industries, they're attacking their opponent. So it just sort of, it's something that where I don't have to be I have to be careful, but I have to be careful in a different kind of way. But I would say as a college student, you have to be careful, much more careful than I need to be, because you do have employers who will comb your social media, and not only will they look at things that they think might reflect poorly on their brand, but they'll also, in some instances, they will look at your political views, whatever they are, if they are expressed, and that could turn people off, depending on the employer. And so you definitely have to be careful. I think it's probably best when you're in the job market to, a recommendation that I make is to either to go through and sanitize your account before you start looking for jobs. Make sure that if you're going to, it also depends on what industry you're going into, right? So if you're going into politics, for instance, then that's a little bit different, right? If you're outspoken around issues and you're aggressive around certain issues, that could actually be in your favor. So I want to just back up and say everything is like the media is context driven. So is so many other things. But I do think you should, number one, sanitize your account. Make sure. I've even heard stories about employers if they see you at too many college parties with drinks in your hand, that could has impacted the perception of employers around a potential candidate, right? Right or wrong, fair or unfair, that's, I have heard that to be, I've heard that from HR professionals that I know. Profanity, a lot of profanity I've heard from HR professionals can be something that's a turn off to folks. And I know someone who applied for a job recently and they made a joke about something being, how did they say it? Something about a wet fart. And they were the top candidate. And because the person hiring thought that joke was in poor taste, they went from being the top candidate to not getting the job. So I do think you should sanitize your account, keep any account that you use for personal photos, family. I would keep that private. Also understanding you have to be careful with private accounts too, and make sure your settings don't allow people to post on your wall or share things that you, or share things that you posted in a private space. So yes, I would say in your context, you need to be very careful. For me, I'm sure there are opportunities I've lost because of my outspokenness. I would think probably a lot of them would probably have been opportunities I wouldn't have taken to begin with, but I'm certain that that's the case. But to me, for me, part of entrepreneurship and what makes entrepreneurship something that I want to do for the rest of my life and what I've been doing is because it's my business. There's no one at the top to tell me what I can and can't say, right? Like I do certainly try to be prudent to some extent. And I do try to be mindful of things that I think that could come back and hurt our clients. But a lot of what I have said on Twitter is I've said in conversations with the clients, and clients have said as well. But the beauty of entrepreneurship for me is that I create the company culture. So in an age where most people don't stay, it's not like back in the day where people stayed at jobs for 30 years. People that come to work with me stay. We have most people started right out of college and they're still with me 5-6 years later. They're not looking on Glassdoor. They're not looking anywhere because we have a company culture that is one where people have the freedom to speak as long as it's not in the context, as long as they're not saying anything harmful or hurtful. We have an upfront, a direct, honest company culture where where we're honest with each other, where I'm transparent with the team, and where people don't try to sabotage one another or throw each other under the bus. And that's something I'm really proud of, and I would not have been able to do that without entrepreneurship. So I would say because that's my context, I'm a little bit freer to say what I want, but I wouldn't recommend that for most people.
Tara,
Awesome.
one of my favorite stories is we have a graduate who spent a number of years working for Iceland Air, and he speaks every summer to our program in Oxford. And he tells a story that he was interviewing, he had a job opening, and a young woman was coming in for an interview, so he checked her Twitter feed right before the interview, and she tweeted, "I'm going for an interview today at Iceland Air. I really hope I don't get this job. I don't want to move to Iceland." So, needless to say, she did not get that job. So,
Yeah.
yeah. You mentioned as you're talking that you may have lost some clients, but there may have been some clients you wouldn't have taken anyway. Dave Kasnoff, who's one of our other professors, if you see somebody on the screen who doesn't look like he's a student besides me, that's Dave. He texted me a question. Dave, do you want to just ask your question, or I can read your text, whatever's best for you? You have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I do need to unmute. Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, Tara. Thanks for joining us. I was curious if you found, if you've encountered, I'm looking at this through the lens of professional ethics. If you've ever found a situation where a client came to you and asked you to do something, and whether the client, him or herself, or the project created a conflict of ethics or a moral conflict, and you said, thanks, your money's not green enough for me to violate my own personal or professional code of ethics, and how you handled it.
Well, that's an excellent question, and it has happened. So sometimes we get clients that want to come because obviously I'm a woman-owned business, I'm a Black-owned business. So we get clients that have done things that haven't had negative impacts on communities of color or negative impacts on women. It's like when rapists, I hate to be so direct, but I'm a direct person. When rapists want to hire a woman lawyer, right? Harvey Weinstein wanted a woman lawyer. So we've had people come to us because they want to sort of use us as a shield, right? To clean up their PR mess, but it's a PR mess that they created through nefarious acts. And so I do turn those clients down. It's one thing we've done crisis communications because we've had clients who've had a crisis through no fault of their own. An employee did something. If you have a big company, you can't control for the actions of every employee, right? So we've definitely had situations where we had to help clients when someone did something nefarious, but it wasn't the client, it wasn't the leadership. So in those instances, then certainly we will guide our clients through it. We've also had situations where something that a client has said on social media, I have certain freedoms, but my clients don't have some of those freedoms that I have, right? So we've had situations where clients have been a little too outspoken on social media and had really challenging repercussions. So in those situations, certainly we are there. We will be with the client. We will work with them. We will work to resolve the situation. But in terms of my values, my team is also, I don't ask anyone when they come to work, I don't ask them about their beliefs or anything. I don't even think you're allowed to do that. But I think because of the fact that we're socially conscious, I attract a certain candidate that's interested in working, right? Because they see what we do and who we work for and who we represent. And so the team also will sometimes, when we had a client we weren't sure about, a potential client, I should say. And it was a recommendation through another person who I worked with a long time. Oh, Rich, Jerry Gibbs.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah. So we had a recommendation through a colleague who I'd worked with. And I don't know, it was something, and I trust the colleague, and the colleague is someone who I think comes from a good place. But my antennas went up with some things about this potential client. He had a whistleblower. The whistleblower was someone who had broken the law. So he was falling back on this sort of, the allegations of this whistleblower are false because look, that person's broke the law. But I just didn't have a great feeling about it. And so I talked it over with my team. That's the other thing. I bring it to the team just to make sure that, maybe I have a blind spot, or maybe I'm being too overly cautious. And as a team, we decided we're just not sure. about this particular person. And the person was really charming and charismatic, the leader of this particular business. And and so, I'd had some clients that were sort of reminded that this particular person reminded me of. And so I declined the business, even though it was referred by someone whose judgment I trust. I don't think the person who referred it would ever refer someone in bad faith or that they thought did something wrong. But for me, it's just having the experiences I've had, because I did have a client that ended up being that got past me. And the similarities between that client and the potential client were just too strong. And so we did decline it, but that was a decision I made with my team. And so that's the other thing that I do. I involve them in it as well, which is why I think folks who work with me stay with me longer, because they have an opportunity to kind of have their say and they're empowered in that way. But yeah, I mean, for me, not all money is worth it. And so I just prefer to, for me, I enjoy, it's hard being an entrepreneur. It's hard work. It's a grind. Everybody said it, some people said it would get easier. It has not gotten easier. So where I generate the reward from, for me personally, is knowing that I'm representing people who are doing great work and who are doing meaningful work and who are making the world a bit better of a place. So that's my guiding principle. I would say this, though, in the reverse, because I've been so fastidious about only bringing people to the media that I fully feel confident I can vouch for, it makes it a lot easier for us our relationships with the media are so much stronger, because they know they can trust anyone that I'm bringing or pitching for an interview. They know it's a quality person. They don't have to do research. They're not going to be embarrassed later because they wrote a positive story and then it turned out the person was a monster, right? So that has in fact been something I think that's helped me too at the same time professionally.
Thank you. That's very reassuring to hear. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think what Tara's, one of the takeaways from what you just said is the value of relationships, on a number of levels. Like, she mentioned this guy, Jerry Gibbs. If you hear from somebody who you've known for a while, you trust them. And, I get not pitches, but, depending on who it is, you take it with a grain of salt or you take it seriously. And that's something that's going to be a little difficult for all the students. It comes with the years of working, building relationships, you're learning what works and what doesn't.
Right.
Yeah. I want to shift gears a bit and talk a bit about your work on some of the political talk shows, because it's a class about media and democracy, and we've been looking at that interaction. And I kind of suggested in one of our emails, was interested in learning from you where you see these talk shows fit on the spectrum of politics, democracy, media. A lot of people look at them and said, oh, it's just a bunch of people shouting and yelling at each other. But talk about them. Like, why do you do them? What's the value of all those shows?
So I certainly have my critiques of cable news for sure. I'm not here to say that that I have my critiques of the American media, period. Right. So I'll start by saying that I think that my biggest critique of our cable news and American media is that it's not great in terms of educating people about policy, right? It's much more about politics. So I think they should just, frankly, be referred to as political shows, like in the way that we have entertainment shows. We have Access Hollywood, and we have these shows, and they're very much their own genre, and that genre is entertainment, right? So to me, the big three networks, MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News, are in fact political news networks. They are not news networks writ large. And so I think that they should be branded as such. And actually, MSNBC used to brand itself as the place for politics. I think they should, frankly, should have kept that tagline, because it's actually very accurate, right? And so I think that I'm getting a thing. Is it me? Okay. So I do think that the shortcoming is that they are viewed as actual news programs, and they're political news programs. So that's number one. I participate in them because I've worked on campaigns and have consulted on campaigns, and I do try to inject as much as I can. I try to inject policy into when I participate in the cable news. I do try to inject policy to the greatest extent that I can. So I do see it as an opportunity to educate people on how the system works. I don't always get the chance to do it in the way that I'd like to, but from time to time, I am able to kind of get messages out in terms of how you actually move the needle in politics, right? When I was in the governor's office, it was, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So making sure that people understand that, making sure that people understand the importance of local politics and local elections and how that impacts your life sometimes far more than the federal government does. And so I have had an opportunity, and people have written to me and responded saying that they felt like they learned something, that I always offer some new insight or some new guidance. And so I try to use the opportunity to do that. From a selfish perspective, the self-interested side is that I do have a business. I have a socially conscious business, and the ability to gain brand awareness and get clients is also part of why I participate in the media. Right? Is that that's part of why I participate. So for me, I do, it's, as I mentioned, it's harder, right, for me, because I have a socially conscious business. So it's not as lucrative of a business. So every time I'm on the air, the beauty of doing cable news is that essentially it's what we call earned media. And earned media is media you don't pay for. So every time I'm on there, it's essentially an ad for my business, because they say Tara Dowdell. So the amount of money I would spend to try to have those same ads would be prohibitive for me. So that's the other, that's the self-interested side of it, is that I do have certain realities as a business owner. I do have to market myself and market the business, and to be able to do it at no cost is certainly, I shouldn't say no cost, because it's time, right? There's time, there's effort that goes into it. But that's also another component of why I do it.
Yeah, Tara, your comments about the lack of policy on the cable news shows, I think it applies also to the general media. And one of the things we've done in the class, and no surprises, look at the coverage of the Democratic primary and the politics in general. Is just so much focus on the horse race issues as opposed to policy. And it was nice for me to hear that when you do mention policy, people want to hear it, because sometimes we'll hear from the media, we're writing about the things people want to read about, and I think to a certain extent, people want the shiny objects to read about. But what's really important to them is the policy stories, the things that are going to affect their daily lives.
Right.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Madeline to ask you a question. Madeline, does some great work with our TV station, and like a lot of our student journalists, has been pressed into action the last week or 2 weeks on the coronavirus. But Madeline, why don't you pose your question to Tara?
Hi, thank you for being with us today. I'm Madeline. I'm a senior journalism major, and I was just wondering, from being a regular guest on MSNBC, CNN, Pix 11, what are some tips you have from being someone who's been interviewed so many times for young journalists when they conduct interviews, and how to ask the right question?
I think clearly you and your colleagues are already doing one of the right things, a lot of research. So research on the person that you're interviewing. So I think that's really important, going through the Twitter feed, all of that, because sometimes you'll get a lot more information than you would in what other forms of communication that someone has available. But I do think that the research piece is really important. And also, I just, again, I wish that there was more policy in our journalism. And so I think to the extent that, I think people have an opportunity to stand out right now if they talk about policy, because there's such a dearth of it, of policy discussion. I think journalists that kind of focus on it would have a platform, even if the argument that people want to make is that not a lot of people care about policy. I don't actually buy that argument. I think it's how policy is delivered and communicated, right? Everything's communications. But even if you want to make the argument that there are fewer people who are interested in policy than are politics, right? I still think if that number is small, the person talking about policy will still dominate that group, right? So you'll still have a sizable audience by definition. But I do think the research piece, preparing the questions ahead of time, as Professor Lee has directed you to do for this class, I think, and then also the inclusion, if it is in a political spectrum, the inclusion of policy versus politics is really, to me, what people need right now, and actually have always needed, frankly.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, some of the basic writing and reporting classes I teach when I talk about interviewing skills, it's essentially most important thing is what you just said. Go into the interview knowing as much as you can about the person and what they do, and they're going to respect you, and you're going to ask better questions, and you're going to get better answers. So,
right.
Want to shift a bit to where we started this semester, which was with the presidential primary. I'm going to ask Joe Cirillo to ask you a question about that. But before he does, what is your sense about, and I guess none of us know what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks, but what's going to happen with this year's presidential campaign? And, down the road, you think what we're going through right now is going to significantly change the nature of politics and presidential campaigns?
It's a really interesting time. I mean, this is just, every day we're living history, but I really feel like, just every day generally, we live history, right?
Yeah.
Once today is over, it's gone. It disappears. It's now history. But this is a really kind of amazing moment, right, in our history. And it's going to be written about and in a way that's just, that will be talked about for centuries in the way that we talk about other kind of big historic global and or US specific moments. So I do think that it will change politics. So there's the legislative piece, there's the $2.2 trillion stimulus, the CARES Act. And so there's about, I believe it was about $4 billion in that related to elections. So there's that, right? There's that piece and what that means. And so part of that is vote by mail, absentee ballots. There were a lot of concessions made around those issues, right? Around these issues of expanding voter access, right? And expanding the ways voters have access to the ballot box. So that is one way that there will be changes, right? Additionally, I think that there's just going to be seismic changes generally, because I remember with cable news, other than Al Jazeera, most cable news wouldn't let people come on via Skype, right? Because it doesn't look as good. in terms of television as a visual medium, Skype or FaceTime don't look as good, right? Than have someone having an actual cable, running a cable through their home or whatever. So now you have all these people going on cable news via FaceTime or Skype. And so I just, and candidates doing much more online engagement because they don't have a choice, right? So what does that look like? Does that change? Does that actually radically change how we do politics moving forward? How people campaign, right? So I think there's so many shifts that have occurred, because if I'm, now that Skype is become kind of a dominant platform in terms of not being able to bring people into studio, if I get called I'm doing a MSNBC on Sunday and I'm doing it via Skype, I want to continue to do it via Skype, even once we're able to come in studio. I mean, the convenience of that is, so I'm just, so there's so many, I think there will be a lot of shifts, because a lot of things that people thought we couldn't do online, we're doing online, right? So I think campaigns will adapt. I'm going to do a workshop, a webinar, for Rutgers for the Center for American Women in Politics around how do women run effective campaigns now in this context in COVID, right? During this COVID pandemic. So, there are people like me doing workshops on how do you, in this moment, run an effective campaign, right? So they're candidates that I can't be the only person that has been approached to do that type of webinar, right? So I think that there are going to be a lot of shifts in our body politic that are going to reverberate as a result of this moment, this historic moment.
Yeah, and also the technology has gotten better, and it's still not what you see from a regular TV, equipment. But I know when I watch things and people are talking via Skype or Zoom, the quality is a lot better than maybe it was 2-3 years ago.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Joe had a really specific question about the current campaign. So go ahead. I see you there, Joe. Here.
Yeah, hi, Tara. I'm Joe Serralo. I'm a senior journalism major with a focus in broadcast journalism from Long Island. And I was wondering, regarding the current election, specifically Joe Biden, how much you feel that his promises to appoint a female vice president and an African-American woman to the Supreme Court are going to help him in areas that Hillary really couldn't relate to voters back in 2016.
Wow, that is a good question. So I do think there is a big thirst for a woman vice president from a large group of voters. I wouldn't say from all voters, and there's certainly people who probably are against that, right? Just for various reasons, regardless of who the person is. But I do think that is something that helps in the Democratic Party. I would say that's something that helps them with a large swath of voters. I think also the commitment to appoint an African American or a Black woman to the Supreme Court is also something that I think is helpful to him. I would say the one thing that troubles me is the way that the framing of the pushback against it, right? So the fact that we've never had a woman president ever in this country is shameful to me. So I was actually in Taipei in Taiwan when they elected their first woman president. I remember thinking, wow, next year we're going to do this, and it didn't happen. And now she's been reelected, Tsai Ing-wen in Taiwan, or as they call us, the leader of Taiwan, depending on your political view related to geopolitical politics with China. So we have Angela Merkel in Germany. We have Australia. I mean, there's around the world, Rwanda, which has predominantly women in their government, and also a lot of their cabinet ministers are women. I think the majority are women as well there. And they literally had a genocide 25 years ago and have leaps and bounds turned their entire country around. And that's in large part because they have so many, there's like direct correlation between the number of women they have and the improvements made in their healthcare system, for instance, and education system, right? So my problem with the framing of it is that people say, well, you know, we should pick the most qualified person. But if we pick the most qualified person, so then the argument is that the only people that have ever been qualified in this country to be president are one black guy and a bunch of white guys. So that means we have to believe that nobody else has ever been qualified. And I think that's a ridiculous notion. The notion that no women have ever been qualified up until this point, and that people weren't picking men based on the fact that they're men, right? So even, you know, Joe Biden, you know, he's had some stumbles. And if he were, he's had some stumbles. All of them have had stumbles, of course. But if Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side were women, do we really think they would be where they are? If Trump was a woman and he said he grabbed men by the would that woman be president right now, right? So so my argument is that I see nothing wrong with Joe Biden saying that, because there are plenty of qualified women. And so when we say, oh, this, by saying you're going to pick a person of color, you're going to do this, that means the person's not qualified. That means, you know, or I'm sorry, excuse me. By saying that, that means you're not picking a qualified person. I think that's a false premise, because we have a nation full of qualified women. We have a nation full of qualified people of color who have been denied opportunities over and over again. We have a nation full of qualified Asian Americans, qualified Latino Americans, you know, whatever people. I remember when I worked in the governor's office and I was appointments director, when I would get recommendations for people to serve on various boards and commissions, all the recommendations would be like mainly white guys from North Jersey. I'm like, they're qualified white guys in South Jersey, right? Like, I mean, even, you know, like, so I think that's my issue with the framing of the debate around the issue. And so that's my 8 cents.
Thanks,
those are great points. Give us your thoughts on how the Democratic, primaries have, what's happened. I mean, all the people of color disappeared, all the women have disappeared, not disappeared, but they're no longer in contention. And we're down to, 2 70-year-old white guys who are going to run against another 70-year-old white guy.
And first of all, I'll say one of my political candidates that I consulted, my firm consulted for in 2018, she's a congressional candidate. And so she would always say, hey, I have no problem with old white guys. I'm married to one. I'm not, but that's what she would say. So I say, I have no problem with old white guys, right? Like, but I do think that it just goes back to my point. I just don't think that a woman would be able to get away with what any of the 3 remaining white guys have gotten away with. And I think that's the biggest issue, the double standard that in many ways women aren't allowed to make the same mistakes. And it's always the likable issue, right? That was the thing that used to drive me nuts. Is Elizabeth Warren likable? Is Kamala Harris likable? I mean, really, we have, now I have to censor myself. So, but women are just held to different standards. I mean, we see the whole likability thing is rarely ever asked about a male candidate. Some journalists have taken to asking it so that they can ask about the woman. And so they can look fair. But at the end of the day, that's a standard that's not applied. And then what people don't realize is then that plants a seed in the minds of voters, right? Oh, is this person likable? And I don't think there's enough consideration given to when it's almost like when a lawyer or a prosecutor throws out something that they can't actually substantiate, but it's to plant a seed of doubt in the minds of the jury. Well, that's what the media does a lot of times with these different standards that are held to women and candidates of color.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I'm going to ask Sam Heffling to ask a question. I know he was having some computer issues, so hopefully Sam is able to hear us. But it's kind of in light of, we looked at, we had on one of our message boards, we talked about the whole coronavirus and how we're going to get through it. And the general sentiment seems to be, we can't be politically divided. We have to work together to do this. So Sam's question kind of falls into that category. So Sam, can you ask your question?
Yeah. So, hi, Tara. Thank you for joining us today. So my question is that, like in this world that we live in, where you've got the rhetoric and, sometimes the character, like flaws of President Trump, do you see in many areas in politics still where, conservatives and liberals actually find the middle line and can actually have a legitimate conversation, about issues that matter and not just about certain individuals themselves?
So I think there's actually a lot of agreement in politics around certain issues. I think that, a lot of people attribute a lot of the divisiveness to Donald Trump. And in my opinion, I do think that he has driven a lot of divisiveness. I was on The Apprentice, and I remember when he wanted to do a blacks versus whites season of The Apprentice. So that's sort of, he's sort of thrived on division, even within the Trump organization. So that's kind of his thing, right? Mm. But I do think that part of the issue a big part of the problem has been Mitch McConnell. So I'll cite some examples. Democrats and Republicans in government agree on there are a lot of these tax credits that don't get a lot of attention. It's kind of wonky stuff, right? But because I work with affordable housing developers, this is something that I'm kind of steeped in the work that I do with them in terms of communications. And so there's something called new market tax credits. So new market tax credits are tax credits that the government, the federal government subsidizes that are then distributed to the states to build in either poor rural areas or underserved urban areas. And it's to provide, it's to subsidize the construction of commercial construction, right? Stores, schools, anything that falls into the commercial category, and to revitalize those areas, create employment opportunities. That is completely a bipartisan thing. Once President Obama got in office, Mitch McConnell all of a sudden had a problem with it. It's been bipartisan for decades, right? There's also low-income tax credits, which fund affordable housing. Democrats and Republicans agree. I think new market tax credits were created by a bipartisan effort. So there's all of these things like that. Tax credits that, for hiring, all of these things that have been long-standing agreement from both parties that these are ways to stimulate the economy, which is unheard of, right? Because both parties have a very different fiscal philosophy, but these are things that they've united around. So I do think around those issues, there's a lot of agreement. Where we do see a lot more cooperation is at the state level. So in a lot of states, you'll see a lot more bipartisan. I don't think it gets a lot of attention, but you'll definitely see a lot more bipartisan support of certain policies. But this is, again, why I think that the media and all of us need to be more aggressive about getting policy out there, because how many people in the public know about new market tax credits? How many people know about low-income housing tax credits? All of these things that actually transform communities, poor, disadvantaged communities, be it urban or rural, that basically lift up people of all races in this country, right? And support employment, right, is the goal. They have support. Earned income tax credit, which is essentially a de facto minimum wage increase for single working parents. That is also something that there's been for the most part, agreement around. And so I think that's why it's incumbent upon us to know about these policies and to advocate for them, because basically the government is really, if you ask me, the behavior of the parties is really a response to, while they can influence and manipulate our behavior, it's really a response to, if the Republican base says we don't want X no more, the Republican Party changes. If the Democratic base says as a whole, we don't want X anymore, the part, like, that's how you bring about change. Because at the end of the day, it's the elections, right? And the primaries, right? If Republican Party picks a certain Republican candidate over another Republican candidate and their values, then that sends a signal to the party, right? That maybe we need to approach things differently. Same on the Democratic side. So I think that, it is ultimately incumbent upon us to push back against those things that we have issues with within our own party, and to also get the policy out there.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We have about 15 minutes left. Can you stick around with us to the end of class, Tara?
Sure.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask Patrick Givlin to ask a question, which you mentioned the apprentice. I think it's a question everybody wanted to ask. So go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, how are you? I am a
Hi.
sophomore communications major from Binghamton, New York. I just wanted to know, simple question, what was it like to be on The Apprentice? And can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
It was a very surreal experience being on The Apprentice. It's actually kind of a funny story because I had never watched the show, but my parents were big fans of it, and most of my friends at the time were big fans. And so my mom said, my friends and I think you should try out for this apprentice thing. And so my mom actually waited in line for me part of the time. So my parents drove over to Trump Tower, and my mom had a chair, like one of those chairs you bring out at like football games or like tailgating parties. So she had one of those chairs. My dad stayed in the car to kind of look after her because it's midnight in New York. And so she was in line, and then at 3 a.m, I took over and took her spot in line, and they waited, and my parents stayed in the car alongside of me. And so I ended up getting picked, and it was surreal. I would say it was a great opportunity. I'm glad I had the opportunity. It generated other opportunities for me. At the time when I was on the show, it was definitely, I don't remember there being any kind of exploitation, or you see these reality shows where they try to get people to drink and embarrass themselves. It's still television, right? So they definitely string the footage together to create a narrative, but I felt like it was one of the, it wasn't a way that I felt like they really tried to harm too many people. I know some people who were on the show might disagree with me, but for the most part, I thought it was pretty straight, pretty straightforward depiction. I think they maybe exaggerated elements of all of our personalities that they thought created the narrative they wanted, but it was still elements of our personalities, right? Like it was still part of who we were and are. So I thought it was a great experience. If I had it to do over, I would have been better. That's the only thing, like my main thing is that, and they did take a couple of creative license with some elements of my background, but I kind of knew when the contract kind of tells you that they might do that. So I can't pretend like I didn't know they might do that. Right. So, but yeah, my biggest regret is that I wasn't better.
Going back to something you said at the beginning when you're talking about your clients and telling a story, how do you feel? I mean, you've had a successful career, you've done some great work. Does it sometimes bother you that people, just want to ask about The Apprentice or things like that?
No, it's part of my life. It's part of what I did. I don't actually, that type of thing doesn't bother me. I see sometimes people get, I've seen other people, they don't want to talk about The Apprentice anymore, people I've been on the show with or who were on the show as well. But it's part of my background. I'm fine with it. And everything for me is formative, right? Everything is what lessons have I learned and what can I do better? And so for me, The Apprentice is part of the story.
Okay, great. I'm just going to jump around students to people who, haven't asked questions yet. And if I didn't call on you, it's probably because someone else had your question or a similar one, or Tara may have addressed what your question was in her remarks. But Landon, I know you've been struggling with internet access where you live, but I was glad to see you got some questions in right before class started, and you know, they were pretty good. So if you can, obviously, if you can still hear me and you still have your internet access, if you could ask Tara your question, that would be great.
Okay. So my name is Landon Allison. I'm a junior environmental studies and journalism double major. And my questions have to do with, well, I'm going to go with my foremost question that was on my mind because I had several that I threw out there. But you have experience analyzing many of the more, we'll say, substantive scandals of our current presidential administration, with the Russia election meddling, the Ukraine aid, and now with the, I haven't seen you speak as much about the coronavirus, the lack of testing and this reaction by the administration as much, but with all these scandals that you've talked about, why do you think that the issues have been responded to with a lack of consequences? And what, if any, possible long-term political effects can we expect of this lack of response?
Wow, that is a great question. So I haven't talked as much about the COVID response because a couple of things. So healthcare is one of the areas of my business practice. So we represent an urgent care in Brooklyn. We do work for a health initiative in Northern Virginia. We've done work with Medicare and a Medicare ACO over the years, a provider network, community health centers, the whole 9 yards. So the part of it is that in all honesty, I'm kind of angry about it. So I haven't quite focused my thoughts to even tweet about it, and I'm upset because I think it's and I'm just going to be completely candid and direct. I think it's just downright shameful what the administration has done. Most recently, the thing that has really, and so I'll back up. So one of my clients, actually two of them, they're co-founders of the urgent care. They both had COVID. They are now recovered, but they had to close their urgent care, which is located in an economically disadvantaged community, but they had to close their urgent care. They were unable to get PPE. They had to figure out how to get PPE. They got mixed messages from the federal government in terms of what to do. They had the federal government, they had the president downplaying in the very beginning the severity of what was happening. And there were no protocols. They had to, after getting COVID, they had to establish their own protocols and figure that out, which is fine, but it's very hard to do that when you are a co-founder of an urgent care and you have patients coming in, not streaming in nonstop. And they also work in emergency rooms, both of them, at some of the busiest and most challenged hospitals in Brooklyn. So I've heard, so I knew about the mismanagement before any of this hit the news because I was hearing from clients. And I just think the lack of consequence is stunning. It's stunning. And I think there's a couple of factors at play. So I think that maybe my Twitter might not be as nuanced on this, but I think that that some folks have been influenced by bad actors, people who it's in their political interest to downplay this. I heard that Dr. Fauci is getting death threats now and has to have security. So part of it is that there are folks who have been propagandized by bad actors to believe that this is not the risk that it is. I think part of it is that people are paying, or some Americans are loosely paying attention, not because they don't care, but because people are busy, right? And there's so much news and it's hard to consume everything if you're raising a family and now your kids are home and you have to do remote learning with your kids and you have to do your work for work, and you have to try to figure out how you're going to pay the bills. So I think that's another reason why some Americans may not have a full sense of what has transpired. The other thing is the fact that Florida got 100% of what it asked for in terms of PPE, in terms of ventilators, and that states that have been denying what is going on got more than what they asked for. And then New York, which is on the front lines where people are dying and struggling, has not gotten what it's asked for, despite New York being a donor state, meaning that we send the federal government more than what we get back, and that we subsidize other states. So, so part of it for me is that I'm really kind of enraged about what has transpired around this, around COVID, and it's sad. It makes me very sad. In addition to being upset and angry. And so I think that's part of why I haven't spoken as much about it. But, you know, to talk at night and then to have people demonize doctors who, you know, to talk with my emergency room physician, who's the co-founder of the urgent care, to talk to her at night and she's crying. I've never heard her cry before in my life. And she's crying, right? So to know what people are doing and how people are stepping up in this time of crisis, and then to have them be demonized, accused of stealing equipment and stealing PPE, accused of over-exaggerating, accused of purposefully lying for political reasons, when actually a large percentage of doctors are actually Republicans. So I'm kind of like, it's demoralizing, and yeah, I mean, the only thing I could say is it makes me really, really angry, and I haven't spoken as much on it because I actually don't want to be, as much as I'm pretty outspoken on Twitter. This may shock people if you read my Twitter. I actually don't say everything I want to say. So that probably comes as a surprise, but I just hope that ultimately we learn some very serious lessons for this, because this won't be the last time something like this happens. And I think we as a nation need to really come to terms with who we want to be as a country, and we need to come to terms that together. You know, do we want to go the way of China and Russia, or do we want to try to continue to work to be the best, I know it sounds hokey, America that we can be? And so thinking about this and everything that's going on, and also thinking about my own business, like, while things are going well for us now, relatively speaking, I don't know what's going to happen a couple of months from now. I don't know, what's going to happen to me, and I can't afford to get sick from COVID. Like, I have a 6-person team. It would be a huge loss. So yeah, I think that's why I haven't been as outspoken about it, because I just been pretty much angry and demoralized by it, and it's been just hard to even put it into compressed thoughts, as is obvious by this long soliloquy.
Okay, thanks for sharing that with us. I was scanning through the questions while you were talking, and since we probably have time for one more, I would say what most students wanted to know was just really advice for getting a job when you get out of college, advice for starting your own business the way you have. So in 2 or 3 minutes, if you could just give what you think would be the best advice to the students.
So I think in terms of my passion, which is entrepreneurship, if you are going to pursue entrepreneurship, I would say, number one, whatever it is that you're looking to pursue in the entrepreneurship space, immerse yourself in it. Figure out all there is to know about the industry, whether it's the restaurant industry, whether you're creating an app, whether you're starting a service business like mine, where it's marketing or PR. Just learn all that you can. If you can, shadow someone who's already in the industry. Find a mentor. obviously shadowing is harder now in this environment we're in, but even shadow them online, like every time they do things online, be a part of that. So that would be my first piece of advice is to do that. Also, with respect to entrepreneurship, it's hard, right? It is very, very hard. I'm not going to pretend like it's easy, because it's not. It's tough and it's frustrating. But you have the ability to, everything you do, you have the ability to follow your passions and live your life on your own terms for the most part. And you also have the ability, as I said earlier, the thing I love about it is that working in politics, I've had people, where I've worked in political settings where I lived in fear every day that some of the people who I worked with who didn't share my values were going to sabotage me or were out to get me for whatever number of reasons. And so it was like, I lived in fear. I always felt like I had to cover my butt. Everything I did, I had to make sure I was covered, because there were folks who were either jealous or jockeying. And so I always had to, I couldn't really appreciate and enjoy what I was doing because I was so worried about that. Right. And that was not my full experience, but that was some of my experience. And so when I started my business, I made the decision. I said, my culture of my business is going to be different. We're going to be different. We're going to have a consultative team where we work together. Yeah, of course, we're going to get on each other's nerves sometimes. Of course, we're going to have arguments or things are going to happen, but it's going to be an environment where people don't feel like their coworkers are stabbing them in the back, talking behind their back, belittling them. None of that will happen where I am. It won't be tolerated because leadership starts at the top, right? And so it gives you the opportunity to really build a culture that you believe in, right? And that is different than most professional cultures. Professor Lee, I hear academia can be really rough. Sure, that's for another conversation, but I hear it can be rough. I hear you guys, there's some sharp elbows in academia.
Yeah, it's well, working in the governor's office was good training for it.
Yeah, it was good training for it. So that's what I didn't want, right? So I think entrepreneurship gives you an opportunity to do that, to build your own culture. So, but I would say also, this sounds corny, but like, don't give up, right? One of my clients, when she opened her first franchise restaurant, she got turned down by 7 banks. It was the 8th bank that said yes. They gave her the loan, and now she's off to the races, right? So there's something to be said about grit, and that, sometimes, as Mike Tyson, there's a Mike Tyson quote that I love: everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So in entrepreneurship, you will get punched in the face, but it's all about that getting back up. And when you get punched in the face, yeah, it's kind of hard to keep up with the plan. So, but I'm so proud of my business. I'm so proud of my team. I'm proud of the fact that we're functioning the way we're functioning right now in the midst of this pandemic. And I'm energized by it. I feel like I'm a startup again. It really is a really great feeling. So I'll say that. In terms of pursuing your other dreams, I think relationships, and actually this applies to entrepreneurship as well. Relationships. Of course, be good at what you do. Of course, have mastery before you go to any interview. The basics, right? Show up early. Know everything you need to know about the company. Have a professional, proofread, quality cover letter. Don't lose sight of some of the basics that are tried and true. Send a handwritten thank you note afterwards, right? Don't just send an email. Go above and beyond, right? Set yourself apart from other candidates with those extra touches that you can add to what you're doing. Sanitize your social media to make sure there's nothing on there that could potentially be harmful for you in terms of a recruiter or in terms of HR department vetting you. And if you get a face-to-face interview, or if you're doing a Skype interview, make that eye contact, right? Look in to try to, as best you can online, look into look into people's faces. Once we get past this, the firm handshake, looking people in the eye, all of those things that are sort of basic things that have contributed to folks' success. Because sometimes it's the little things, right? It's the little things that set one candidate apart from another candidate. And then build relationships, but build real relationships, not just a relationship where you're just a one-sided trying to get everything you can from the other party, but find ways to add value to that person that you're building that relationship with, so that it is a reciprocal relationship. It's not a manipulative or user kind of relationship. So you want to add value to them because they're helping you too. So you want to be reciprocal and be transparent in terms of your relationships. I think where people go wrong with relationship building is if you're reaching out to someone because you want their help, be transparent. Don't try to like schmooze or whatever. Just say, hey, I'm reaching out to you because I really need your help. And people appreciate that. And if there's anything I can do for you, let me know, right? So, but be transparent if you're looking to leverage your relationship for something. Be transparent about what that is. And so that would be, and then maintain that relationship, cultivate it, stay in communication with people. It's obviously a lot easier now because everybody's sort of home, remote working. So it's easier to maintain relationships online than when we're all running around. So those would be my pieces of advice.
Okay, well, thanks. We'll wrap up with that.
Oh, wait, one more thing.
Okay, go ahead.
When we are able to resume some degree of normalcy, travel. I travel a lot. It's one of the things that's been transformative for me, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have traveled, but continue to travel, see the world, see how other people do things, enrich, learn. I know sometimes I probably come across as like pretentious when I talk about my travels, like, oh, I was in Rwanda. It's not my intention to come across that way, but it's my passion. It's the one thing despite being an entrepreneur and working 12, 14-hour days, it's the one thing I don't compromise on. Even if I have a lot of work, I'd rather be doing that work from Istanbul than from Jersey City, right? Like, so, so travel, see the world, especially when we can resume that again.
Okay. And it's not an exotic place, but if your travels take you to Western New York, we'd love to have you talk to us in person someday. So.
I would love to do that. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thanks again. And I just want to say on a personal level, I'm really happy for the success you've had in your career. Like everything, like when we're watching the TV and you come on, I said, oh, there's Tara. So I kind of still feel that connection. So,
oh, thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all this morning. Thank you. Good luck in everything you're doing. And we will be better. We'll come out on the other side of this. And I'm actually, as much as I talked about some of the negative stuff, I am actually very optimistic. I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned. And I think a lot of us will learn those lessons and we'll be better.
Okay. I'm joined by my wife. I'm not sure if I ever met Ann during a campaign.
Oh, we did.
Tara, you know what? I met you. You walked into the Princeton University chapel the day of the inauguration.
Yes, I know, because you look familiar. So I was like, I know we had to have met. Great to see you.
Did. He really does. He gets so thrilled every time he sees you on the TV.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll take it.
I just wanted to say, hi, students. It's so nice to see you all.
Yeah, and Ann teaches with me too. So that's lots to catch up on. But, this has been great. I think the students have gotten a lot out of it. And I'll follow up with an email later. Students, we're a little bit over time, so just check your email. As I said, we have some things we need to do before Tuesday's class, but I'll get them all in an email to you. So with that, I'm going to end the meeting. Wish everybody a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Have a good
Great
one.
day, all.